This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
Got a lot to get into with this one, so we're going to try and keep the intro short this week. Want to make sure I allot enough time for the AEW pay-per-view predictions. Of course, this is the Five Starr Wrestling Report podcast for anyone new that is watching for the first time. We are here on Mondays and Fridays each week for new content on YouTube and Rumble. Today we've got the Dynamite report to go over, as well as the continuation of our retro review series, which we will get into in the second half of the podcast. If you're new to the show and you like what you hear today, make sure to subscribe, comment, and like the show for me so you can stay posted with all future content. And as always, we're going to kickstart with the Dynamite rundown and get that out of the way first. And it is officially the 3rd year anniversary of AEW. Boy, can you take that statement in about 8 different directions. It's definitely been a roller coaster ride for this company, that's for sure. How much they've actually learned from their mistakes in that 3-year time span is pretty up and down depending on how you frame it. If you compare it to the first Double or Nothing pay-per-view they ran on May 25th, 2019, well, they've definitely made some vast improvements when it comes to the talent they've acquired. Looking back, I don't actually remember a whole lot about that first Double or Nothing pay-per-view they ran. I think that was the show where they did Cody and Dustin, which is still probably one of the best, if not the single best match AEW's ever done in company history, at least when it comes to something pertaining to actual legitimate pro wrestling. So you can immediately disqualify anything the Beta Bucks have ever been associated with. In terms of business management and operations, I mean, as an avid viewer of the product since inception, I would probably say that things are still kind of in the same domain in that department. Tony Khan is still allowing the inmates to run the asylum in a lot of cases, and he's still letting people have way too much leeway with the stuff they're permitted to do on television. He's certainly not a promoter or an owner like Bill Watts was, where you actually bought that the man was a legitimate authority figure, a guy that would have his balls to actually put his foot down and have control over what his talent did on his program. Tony he's kind of a spineless, weak, beta-minded priss. And that's evident anytime I see him in interviews hugging his talent and sounding like he could benefit from testosterone supplements. And, I don't want to get hung up on that whole deal. I'm sure there will be plenty more to vent about once we get to the 5-year anniversary of AEW, if they're still kicking and screaming at that point. I do want to save some time toward the end to run down my predictions for the Double or Nothing pay-per-view, because it is one of their bigger shows, and I've been following the shows consistently enough to weigh in on how I think things are going to go down based on how it's been presented to me on television. But let's get into the actual show. And in following the regular formula of Dynamite, where they open hot and continually fall off the proverbial cliff throughout the course of the night, they open with the cage match with Wardlow versus Shawn Spears, with MJF as the special guest ref, who promised us that he was going to call this one straight down the middle. Yeah, I'll bet. And because these guys have actually done such a fantastic job in this feud, and they've actually bothered to give the people a rhyme and a reason to care about what's been going on in this story, the The people actually reacted exactly how they should have when they did all of the angles they did in this match. And that first instance came right out of the start where Wardlow gets into the cage and MJF goes over to do the pat down deal on Wardlow, which is phenomenally great for a whole other list of reasons. And because he's still handcuffed, MJF fishes around in his pocket to pretend that he has a key to uncuff him, but oh shoot, turns out he didn't have the key after all. So because he's a scumbag prick, he and Spears immediately start pounding away on him in the corner. And they get their little heat spots in there early on. MJF's doing a great job interacting with the crowd. And I appreciated that they made sure not to run with the heat for too long here. As I've said before, Wardlow is not the kind of guy that should be long-term selling. You want to have someone get in a couple shots on him and work him over for a minute, that's one thing. But that whole period where he was having competitive fights with all the big guys and he was selling for the majority of the match before he was making his comeback, no. Now, the people don't want to see it. It weighed the segments down as a result, and it didn't generate the right kind of reaction. So here, they kept the heat simple. Wardlow fired back on Spears. They tried to cut him off again. And that set up the fantastic little finishing sequence here, where MJF tries to restrain Wardlow while Spears grabs his chair. And he goes to whack Wardlow over the head with it, but he dodges. Spears gives MJF a safe but still great chair shot to the head. MJF takes a fantastic pratfall, so he's dead. And I just kept my eyes glued on the TV from then on, because everything from this point forward was absolutely perfect. Spears is kneeling over MJF, and it's not the overselling bug-eyed look that would just made the whole thing look too hokey. It was the, oh, I fucked up, and now I'm about to die expression. And they had that great visual of Wardlow rising from the ashes behind him. Spears turns around and realizes that he's about to get shit canned. And that leads us to the downbeat of the Powerbomb Symphony. It's great because, Wardlow's hitting Spears with all these power bombs. I think Bryce was the referee that ran in to count the finish. And Wardlow finishes it off with giving Spears the power bomb in the chair. And meanwhile, MJF's there in dead man's position, hasn't moved an inch since the chair shot. What a great little angle that was. And I'll say this. I've laughed pretty hard at things in AEW before. Some of it due to their stupidity, but other times because they actually did something that was genuinely funny. After Wardlow won this match, and they had all the security go in there to get their asses laid out, and Wardlow picked up that security dude, and he threw him into the cage with a powerbomb, and the guy completely disappeared into the ether because I think he fell under the ring apron to the floor. That might have been the hardest I've ever laughed watching an AEW show in the last 3 years. I was crying when I saw this poor geek get tossed into the cage and then he just dropped to the floor off camera and we never saw him again. I went back and rewatched this like 8 times in a row. It never got any less funny. Someone's got to make a gif of that because it's too good to pass up on. Like, anytime someone tries to confront Wardlow on this show going forward, they just need to replay him powerbombing the guy into the cage and him completely eating shit on the floor. This is easily the match I'm looking forward to most for the pay-per-view. And I'll say this about Wardlow. And this is probably something that Tony Khan needs to actually hear from people that would like to see his company grow and succeed beyond where they are right now. Wardlow is probably the closest thing AEW has right now to a potential top homegrown babyface. Someone they essentially built from scratch under their own banner and didn't have to rely on previous indie or WWE experience to become a big name. And you can say what you want about the fact that Wardlow's over now because of MJF and that it won't be the same once he's on his own. Time will tell with that. But with where he is right now, Wardlow's over. And I don't mean kind of, sort of, depending on the market. No, this guy is gaining legitimate traction with the people in every arena he goes to. He's red hot right now. The people always pop for the powerbomb stuff. And if Tony is really serious about committing to someone over the long term, and he's looking for an actual viable top-level main event talent that he can rely on in the future, someone that has actually proven they can get over and actually be a real top world champion and not whatever the fuck he thinks Adam Page is when he's really not, then Wardlow's the guy he needs to run with. So the point is, don't fuck this up, Tony. Of course, we all know he will in the end, but until it actually happens, I'm holding on to that sliver of hope that Tony actually puts on his big boy pants for a change and tries to actually be a competent promoter for the first time in his life and tries to actually market someone who could really make the money as a number one babyface in the next year or so. So this is a great opener. And then we come back from the break with the Jericho Appreciation Society, and I almost immediately skipped over it when it began with Daniel Garcia talking. Apparently my message to AEW didn't go through when I told them to never let the words Daniel Garcia and microphone ever come up in the same sentence ever again. And by the end here, now we know that Tony Khan permits his employees to just randomly roam around the building and set off fireballs in people's faces. If I were working there, I'd be sending my paperwork to GTFO. Talk about unsafe working environments. You got guys setting fire to people, guys getting legs trapped in entrance ramps. The fuck would any sane, rational person ever want to work in a place like this? But skipping over that atrocity, we had this CM Punk Hangman Page confrontation, directed from Tony Schiavone, and they actually let the guy hold the microphone for approximately 2 minutes before Page grabbed the mic. But I did want to pay special attention to this because I've talked extensively already about the fact that the buzz for this title program just hasn't been there for me. I don't think the build has been particularly all that good. And above all else, the character dynamics in this thing have been completely weird. It seems like every week these guys are flip-flopping between face and heel with no rhyme or reason. The crowd's been very 50-50 with both of them. And I think my biggest issue with the whole thing is the way that they've booked Page since he started interacting with Punk on television. He's been doing a lot of this petulant, pouty complaining. He's flipping off Punk left and right, turning his nose sideways at him any chance he gets. And meanwhile, Punk's just kind of been taking on the role of, dude, what's your deal sort of thing. So I wanted to actually see if they were going to even bother explaining why Adam Page has this vehement hatred for CM Punk, even though it's never been thoroughly explained well on TV. And by the end of this whole thing, I'm still kind of on the same page as Punk. I mean, they gave Page the platform to make his case, and again, he really didn't do a good job explaining it. He basically just said that he doesn't think Punk has what it takes to be world champion because being champion is more about what happens on camera. It's what happens off camera that gives people different perceptions. And I mean, okay, I guess I kind of see what they're going for in that aspect. Like the whole idea of Punk's a facade, what the people see from Punk on camera is not the same personality they see off camera. And I mean, if that's the story, great, but fucking explain that. Don't just be all cryptic and vague about the whole thing like everyone watching at home is going to know what it means. Again, dude, it's another one of AEW's biggest flaws as a company. This haphazard mindset that everyone watching is going to be an insider and that we're already going to know what's going on, so therefore things don't need to be explained in detail. Maybe for that fan base, you don't have to explain it because we'll be able to pick up on it. But again, if you're trying to grow your audience and you're trying to actually be a sustainable wrestling company in the long haul that maybe would actually someday like to be the number one wrestling organization at some point in the future, you got to get out of this headspace of everyone knows, we're all in on it, and fuck the rest. Such a stupid mentality to have. And I've got to say, and I'll touch on this a little more once I get to my predictions, this has probably been the least interesting thing I've seen Punk involved with since he's shown up in AEW. For whatever reason, I'm just not feeling this program with Adam Page. Whether it's the story they've tried to craft with the whole thing or the fact that Paige just has been a completely underwhelming and empty world champion. There's a reason I keep calling him their mid-card world champion. I don't know, but I just haven't been able to jump on board with this. Which is kind of why I'm hoping they go with what I want to talk about a little more in the predictions part. But again, I don't think this promo did a great job hard selling me on the match. Even the little physicality they got in there toward the end with Paige dropping Punk with a hard slap. Popcorn fart reaction, man. Then we got Jon Moxley and Eddie Kingston versus Private Party, which I very passively paid attention to. Y'all know my thoughts on Mox now, and Kingston's just another cut and dry example of missed opportunities in AEW. That dude was white hot toward the end of 2021, and now he's doing faction warfare with a bunch of bodies, and the whole thing just sucks. As did the post-match brawl after Mox and Kingston won. I particularly enjoyed the camera filming Jericho and Matt Lee giving Moxley the fakest looking punches and elbows you've ever seen while they had him pinned up against the ring. I was not entirely sold that Jericho was even making contact. I could probably just give you my predictions on the match now because of how little I care about it, but I do want to try and run down everything from the card top to bottom, so I'll save it. I'll build up to that one, if you will. We had Roppongi Vice versus FTR for the ROH tag titles. Because, those are still a thing, apparently. And I won't go too in-depth again on my thoughts on the whole ROH buyout and the way Tony's been presenting it on his television show, but is underwhelming too indulgent? I mean, for what it's worth, I completely forgot that FTR were even the ROH tag champions, and I'm as big a fan of Cash and Dax as a lot of people are. I mean, it was a fine little tag match until the DQ finish at the end, which I'll talk about in a sec, but the fact remains, I'm watching FTR wrestle two guys that are also members of a goofy undercard faction that never wins matches to begin with. The other problem I actually had didn't have anything to do with the actual match. It was the problem that I'm watching FTR wrestle here on the go-home show to a pay-per-view, and they're not even booked for the actual pay-per-view, which is a fucking crime considering how great those two have been in the last 5 months. But, this is another case of them using a match to mostly set up an angle because Jeff Cobb and the Great O'Khan run out for the blatant DQ and start beating on both teams. And of course, Excalibur mentioned the faction or unit they're a part of in New Japan. Like, everyone watching just knew that, so guess we didn't need any context to it. So I have no idea what the group is called, nor do I really care. And I'll tell you, got a little bit of exposure to the Great O'Khan after watching the G1 last year, and that was about all I ever needed to see of that guy again. So, of course, they brought him in here to do an angle with Cobb, and he proceeded to fuck up about 50% of the stuff he was supposed to do. The first of which was him attempting to give one of the guys a cutter off of Jeff Cobb's shoulders, and that looked horrible in execution. And like a minute later, he gave Trent a claw chokeslam through a table off the ring apron, but they mistimed it so horribly where Trent basically threw himself through the table before Khan let go of the hold. So there's another dud debut in the AEW record book. I do like Jeff Cobb. I've been on record putting over how much of a fan I was of him in New Japan, and he was kind of my favorite to win the G1 last year before they went with the same old boring status quo of Lol Okada wins. And alright, I get they're trying to promote their June pay-per-view in New Japan, but do we need this segment to happen on this show? Especially the go-home show. Couldn't you have just done the same thing on the pay-per-view as part of the buy-in and get some people talking about it before the actual pay-per-view started? Imagine this. Holy shit, Jeff Cobb and the Great O'Khan showed up and jumped FTR and Roppongi Vice, and they're both signed to New Japan. Does this mean that there are more of them floating around? What does this mean for the remainder of Double or Nothing? Boom! a fucking developing story throughout the pay-per-view that keeps people on their toes, wondering what's going to happen. No, instead they just did it here, and yay, whatever. More dudes showing up that were not going to be able to give enough time to properly spotlight, but, what else is new with this company? Hardys did a fine little pre-tape in the back talking up their match with the Bucks on Sunday. I still don't care about them or the actual match. The Hardys mean absolutely nothing now, and I can only hope and pray to my Lord and Savior that they are not actually toiling with the idea of putting their world tag titles on the Hardy Boys in 2022. God, after the performances we've seen from Jeff in the last several weeks, no thanks. And then we got the three-way, Ricky Starks, Swerve Strickland, and Jungle Boy. Did not take long for them to start doing the tumbling dance class theatrics. Guess this would also be the point where I chime in on my weekly I hate multi-man matches in wrestling quote. Well, I certainly wouldn't say this was a banger of a multi-man. It was a spot fest, which is pretty much what multi-person matches are anymore, and it's why I hate them so much. Ricky Starks continues to be an underutilized, underappreciated talent that Tony Khan will never do anything with except give him fake belts. Swerve Strickland is another I can do a lot of good athletic flippy shit, and it's pretty much all there is to that. And Jungle Boy continues to be a frustrating example of someone that I would like to believe is ever going to get it, but much like Hangman Page, I don't think he ever will. And with Strickland pinning Starks, logic dictates that him and Keith are not winning the straps on Sunday. The post-match angle was a great AEW moment where Hobbs and Luchasaurus are in the ring fighting, and because they operate under the same umbrella as WWE when it comes to modernized booking, Keith Lee's music hits, so this allows for Luchasaurus and Hobbs to stop fighting so that they could watch Keith make his leisure stroll down to the ring and start fighting them. And they did some lumbering big guy stuff until Keith did a diving plancha to the floor and took out Hobbs and the dinosaur. How nobody got injured in that spot, I'll never know, but yeah, maybe you don't do high spot shit like that when you're less than 7 days out from a pay-per-view where people are expecting to pay money to see them wrestle. Just a thought. Thunder Rosa did a little promo on the stage to hype up her match for Sunday. It was all right. Rosa's a decent little Spitfire babyface, so even if her delivery wasn't perfect, she still got the people to care by the end. She looks like a big star. She's a very pretty woman with a great personality. I just wish her title reign felt like a bigger deal, considering all the hype they put into getting her to that point. She beat Brit to win the thing, and I don't know, now she's kind of a background player in the women's division. Sucks, but it tends to happen when you're trying to feature 158 other women in a given week, 157 of them being nowhere near the same level as Thunder Rosa in terms of skill and ability, not named Serena Deeb. And speaking of such, we had Toni Storm and Britt Baker in the women's Ownheart semifinals. And again, I've talked about this before, but I used to hear so many people rave about how awesome Toni was in WWE, and dude, I'm sorry. I just don't get the big deal. I've seen a couple things from her in NXT UK, and I think she may have done a little bit of work in NXT in the States before her main roster run, but I'm just not seeing what everyone else is. She looks great. She carries herself like a big deal, but when the bell rings, just, that's all I can say about her. She's, Maybe there's a little more to her that's just not coming through on television because of time constraints, but so far I haven't been blown away by her work in AEW. Not that anyone else has really blown me away anyway with crossing over from WWE. She at least looked like she was holding her own in there better than Brit. God almighty. Yeah, Brit did not look good in this match at all. And, I remember saying something very similar when I watched her in that cage match with Thunder Rosa. Granted, the the cage was more of a hindrance to the girls than an enhancement to begin with, but Brit's had a cycle of pretty bad wrestling matches in 2022. She's never been the best ring worker to begin with. She's always been more of a strong promo, and her ability to be a compelling character and sell good facials during her matches usually made up for her faults as an actual wrestler, but yeah, I haven't been all that impressed with Brit's stuff this year. Her beating Tony was questionable. I understand in a sense, Brit's the bigger star in the scope of the current women's division. We talk all the time about them bringing in new, fresh talent and how they seem to instantly become less over the week after they arrive because of how bad they're treated. Explain to me how Brit beating Tony here does Tony any favors. You make her a bit player in a storyline to try and push Brit to the finals so they can do the supposed long-awaited rematch with her and Ruby Riott. A feud that died a horrible death the minute it was over because they beat Ruby and she was never the same afterwards. So what, you're going to try and course correct now that the feud has no buzz and no heat because you fucked it up the first time? I mean, at least if you put Tony in the finals with Ruby, it would give her a pay-per-view payout. But nope, gotta go back to the well with Brit again because, well, we're just giving everyone a fair shake, right? Yeah, Tony was so badly mistreated in WWE. We're going to make it up to her by having her be just another gal in a tournament where she doesn't even make it to the finals. Yeah, whatever. Well, they at least were able to turn this one around by the end. Kyle O'Reilly versus Samoa Joe in the Ownheart semifinals. Apparently these guys had a match in Ring of Honor back in 2015, which I never saw. And if that match happened, that had to have been right before Joe signed with WWE, right? Because I think Joe was in NXT by early to mid 2015. So that must have been like one of his final send-offs. Anyway, this is really good. I will say, I've been on Tony's case about a lot of things in AEW, but at least he picked up on one of my requests in the last couple months. Give me more Kyle O'Reilly singles matches. God, is that guy a breath of fresh air in the business, especially these days. O'Reilly is one of the few smaller guys in the business that I can legitimately buy going toe-to-toe with a guy Joe's size and actually having a believable fight with him. Great stuff in there with O'Reilly working over Joe's arm, which I think was an extension of the injury angle they did with Jay Lethal and Sanjay Dutt from the previous week. And Joe's selling facials are really good throughout. It actually looked like it was a struggle for him to fight back at a disadvantage. Of course, O'Reilly did that stupid fall into the rope spot, which I complained about last time. Still hate that. I wish he would stop doing it. But Joe ended up locking in the coquina clutch at the end for the ref stoppage. I was kind of surprised they went with Joe to win here, but certainly won't complain about it. Sets up him and Adam Cole in the finals on Sunday. In a way, I kind of wish they'd have gone with this match at the finals of the pay-per-view because I don't think Cole and Joe is going to come anywhere close to this level of a quality match. Plus, there's the whole size thing, and well, we'll cross that bridge on Sunday, but overall, very good little main event. Probably the better TV main event AEW's done in a while because they've been in a string of some real clunkers lately in the last half hour of their program. But as I go over the card here and sort of analyze and preview how I think things are going to go down on Sunday, I'm operating under the presumption that this is the actual full card and that they don't have anything else planned beyond what they have announced now. I mean, it looks like a full card to me. By the way, I wanted to point this out too. I love how Sting is one of the central poster guys for this pay-per-view, yet as far as I know right now, I don't think he's booked for the show. Now, of course, Sting's the biggest megastar out of the rest of the guys that got plastered on this poster, so it's a clever marketing strategy. I will give them that. So I'm just going to run everything down from the way it's listed out on the wiki page. It's probably not the actual card structure by the time we get to the pay-per-view, but it'll probably be something close to it. On the pre-show buy-in, we've got Danhausen and Hook versus Tony Nese and Smart Mark Sterling, which is a travesty of a wide range of reasons. not the least of which having to do with them completely mutilating any potential that Hook had of being a big deal in this company. They just can't help themselves, you know? They got someone they could actually make money with down the road, so of course they got to involve him with the stupid comedy. And I know I'll be skipping over this one, so I don't really care who goes over here. My hope is that Hook gets the pin and he chokes out Danhausen and lays waste to all these motherfuckers for having to be involved with it. Jade Cargill versus Anna Jay for the TBS title will either be my piss break match or my go back and catch up on notes segment for the pay-per-view. Jade's retaining, and why this is on the pay-per-view, I have no earthly idea. I don't think I've seen Anna Jay wrestle a match on the show in well over a month. I'm still not exactly sure how this even got booked, but whatever, I'm already spending too much time talking about it. Nope, in fact, I lied. I'm going to take that back. I just looked down here and saw that the next match was the House of Black versus Death Triangle. Now, I will confidently say that this will be my designated piss break. After everything I have seen the House of Black involved with and their whole witchcraft chicanery bullshit in the last several months, I don't ever want to see anything involved with these guys on my TV ever again. My prediction is that Death Triangle wins, and pray to God that the House of Black go away forever so that they don't have to ever darken my television screen ever again with their lights on, lights off bullshit. The Hardys versus the Beta Bucks is certainly an interesting tag match, that's for sure. But again, touched on this earlier, and I'll say it again. The Hardys have already been exposed. This whole reunion thing with them has been a complete flop. But quite frankly, with the way those guys have been working on television lately, especially Jeff, I almost kind of think this will end up being a moderately watchable Bucks match. You know, probably on the same level as their match with FTR, where they actually bothered to be pro wrestlers for a change instead of trampoline stunt showmen. You know, of course, with Jeff actively trying to kill himself in every match he's involved with, and Matt kind of being hit and miss with his material in AEW. You know, I also wouldn't be surprised if they try and pull off a lot of stupid stuff in this match either. I don't know, my hindbrain is saying Matt and Jeff go over, but maybe not. I'd prefer the Hardys to go over. I don't really have an urge to see them go after the tag straps, but probably better them than the Beta Bucks at this point. You know, I haven't talked about this too much with the Bucks and their current booking positioning in 2022, mostly because I try to actively tune out a lot of the shit they're involved with because it's mostly crap. But God, can you think of a point in recent AEW where the Bucks have been less relevant as they are right now? Like, I'm trying to go back, and aside from their match with FTR on Dynamite this year, have the Bucks done anything remotely interesting this year aside from just standing in the background with the Undisputed Era? Now, say what you want about them. I'm not a fan of them by any stretch of the imagination, but, you know, for a team that people still try and bill as an all-time great and talk about their contributions to the business, doesn't seem like they're contributing a whole lot to AEW's overall bottom line in 2022, other than just standing around being dorks and cutting horribly fake scripted promos every now and then. Yeah, but of course, when you got Meltzer Magoo fawning and slobbering all over their nutsack every day, you know, people fucking believe anything, am I right? The modern day Midnight Express. Get the fuck out of here with that garbage. Can't believe anyone takes that guy seriously. Another match, probably be skipping out on this one as well. The Jericho Appreciation Society versus Kingston, Santana Ortiz, and the Blackpool Fight Club. This anarchy in the arena, or whatever they're calling it. Well, at least they're saying the quiet part out loud. Basically letting everyone know offhand, hey, these guys are just going to go do a bunch of random shit for 20 minutes and nothing's going to matter by the end. Who wins? I don't care. Hopefully the baby faces, but anything's possible and you're letting Jericho oversee it. But then we come to the match that I'm most looking forward to. Probably the match that should main event the show, but it won't. At the very least, it should semi-main. It is MJF versus Wardlow. With the stipulations, if Wardlow wins, he is released from his contract from MJF having to work for him. And if MJF wins, Wardlow never gets to sign an AEW contract for the rest of his career. Which is a hilarious stipulation for a reason that I'll touch on in a second here. But as I've noted before, this is the one feud that's probably been keeping me interested in watching AEW over the last few months. It's the one feud that actually has legitimate heat. It's the one feud that actually garners the right kind of reaction from the fans. And it's the one feud with the two closest things AEW has to real star power right now outside CM Punk and, to a lesser extent, Bryan Danielson. I've enjoyed the build to this program, even with the small booking qualms here and there with the way they featured Wardlow. And it's the one program with a real story of high stakes that people can actually emotionally invest in. I'm very intrigued to see how this goes down on Sunday, and if I had to venture a guess as to who should logically go over, I mean, you got to go with Wardlow, right? Because if he loses to MJF here, then what does that accomplish at the end of the day? That just puts Wardlow right back at square one, and it cuts his balls off from under him after all the steam and momentum he's had behind him. However, the more I think about it, how apropos would it be for AEW if they put MJF over here, not allowing Wardlow to sign a contract with AEW, also he could wind up signing with WWE? Could you imagine how fucking phenomenal that story would be? I mean, the rumors of MJF leaving in 2024 are already circulating. If Wardlow ain't going to be a big star in AEW, he may as well hedge his bets in WWE where he knows that Vince is going to love him. Trust me, I'm pretty sure they have an interest in signing him. You're telling me WWE hasn't been scouting Wardlow? Telling me they don't have their eyes on a guy like him? Man, the possibilities. That'd be a great story. I'm glad I thought of it. I'll take my money and a check in the mail. So we'll see what happens at the pay-per-view. Part of me is hoping Wardlow goes over, but man, that twisted, sadistic side of me is also hoping for the latter. We will see. So we have Britt Baker against the winner of Ruby Riott and Chris Statlander for Rampage in the semifinals, which, we all know is going to be Ruby. God, I'm looking at this now. We have 3 girls matches on this show. I don't know about all that. Hopefully they're smart enough to put the Jade match on the buy-in, because I don't know if I really need to be watching 3 women's matches on a pay-per-view. 2 I can probably withstand, but 3? No, that's starting to enter WWE territory of 50-50 booking there, and the quality of talent across both brands is not justifiable to do 3 women's matches on the pay-per-view card. Anyway, I don't know, I'd probably say Ruby wins in the finals, and if their plan is to course correct and make up for the fact that they probably should have put the belt on Ruby when she was white hot when she first showed up, I can get behind that, but, Britt going over wouldn't surprise me either. I don't know, the whole Ownheart tournament has been so lousy. Both sexes, not just the women. I was really kind of hoping they were going to have Toni Storm win it, because this company is absolutely atrocious when it comes to getting over new, fresh talent that shows up. Britt's a been there, done that case already, and, while she is technically one of their bigger stars in the division, the fact is she's not the champion anymore, and I think a lot of us could really use a break from seeing Britt pushed at the top of the card. And Ruby is just someone that hasn't recovered since she lost to Brit the first time around. Maybe her winning and getting the pin over Brit would help, but I just don't see it. We'll see what they do, but this is another match on the show that I'm not that sold on. Samoa Joe versus Adam Cole in the men's Ownheart final should be good. And once I can mentally get past the fact that it'll look like Joe beating on a 14-year-old kid with no physique, and I'll probably be able to enjoy it for what it is. Joe going over is probably the best option at this point, especially if they weren't going to go with O'Reilly and Cole in the finals. And again, I'm glad they didn't go back down that path again, because I don't really need to see that match ever again. But Joe's someone they've protected pretty well so far, and, even though he's feuding with Jay Lethal right now, I just don't see a purpose in putting over Cole. Cole's another guy that they've really neutered with the booking, and to be honest, I really don't know if there's much that you can fix with that at this point. Having him win the tournament, you could argue would be a fresh start, because at least it would signify Cole actually winning something for a change, but I see more value in Joe winning. He's more over than Cole right now, and I've talked about it before, how I think Cole's more of a case of the theme song and the gimmick being more over than the actual guy. The more I watch of his work in AEW, the more I find that to be true. Cole gets the big reaction when his music hits, and the people love to do the Adam Cole Bebe chant at him, but when it comes to the stuff he does in the ring, the people are 50-50 with him a lot of the time. Sometimes they cheer him, sometimes they don't. It all kind of depends on the circumstance. And him facing Samoa Joe, I can almost promise you that people would rather be seeing Joe go over than Cole at this point. I still won't ever know what the whole point of the tournament was, aside from the tribute to Owen. I don't know what Joe wins out of the whole thing, but I guess it all doesn't matter now. The three-way tag title match with the Jurassic Express, Hobbs and Starks, and Keith Lee and Swerve Strickland. I'm expecting them to do a lot of flips, lots of flops, lots of spots, and even though the Jurassic Express shouldn't retain because their title reign is sucked hard cock, that's probably why Tony will keep the belts on them. Hobbs and Starks are clearly the bigger stars out of the three teams, but if they follow the usual formula they do when it comes to Team Taz booking, they'll involve them with big stuff, but they never actually win anything. So I expect no different here, at least until I'm proven wrong upon seeing it. Thunder Rosa and Serena Deeb for the women's title should probably be one of the better wrestling matches AEW's ever done for their women's division. Again, they're easily the two best workers they have under contract right now, and even though the build for this one's been substandard at best, I can at least look forward to seeing how they lay out the match. Rosa winning is pretty predictable, but that's fine. As long as the match doesn't disappoint, I'll be fine with whatever they do. But that brings us to Hangman Page and CM Punk for the AEW World title. And I've already elaborated on my thoughts with this program earlier on, so I'm not going to dive into it again. However, I think there's a way they can salvage this. Maybe turn some of these lemons into lemonade with the booking here. Talked about it. Page, he's not doing it for me as the world champion. If they weren't going to go with Danielson to beat him for the belt back in January when they probably should have, they've got to go with Punk here. It's the right place. It's the right time. And while I understand Tony has this fixation on making Hangman Page his number one guy after all the investment and the energy he's poured into him, I'm sorry. The fact remains, Hangman Page is not a world champion. He's boring, he's dull, and he doesn't feel like a main event level guy as the champion. And they have an outing they can go with here that can give this feud some longevity and give them the opportunity to build Page back up when he was really hot as the chaser challenger instead of being the actual champion. And it's been bounced around a little bit as an idea, but I would not be opposed to Punk turning heel in this match and winning the strap through nefarious means. I think the people are ready for it. You can kind of sense the urge from the crowd where it might give Punk a fresh coat of paint to keep him interesting through the remainder of the year. And while it does put a temporary hold on them revisiting the MJF Punk program in the short term, it would play well into giving them an actual well-crafted long-term world title program they can roll with for the time being. I've always preferred CM Punk as a heel anyway, and Page was a lot better off when he was pursuing the title late last year, instead of actually winning it. And plus, you think there are a lot of other fresh programs you could do with Punk as a heel that you really couldn't do with him as a babyface. I think it's a win-win all around. And again, if you want to go back to the well with Page as the world champion and see where he's at 6 months to a year from now, so be it. I mean, it's not like Page is 40-something years old and at the twilight of his career. That dude's got a long time left in the business if he takes himself seriously and doesn't do anything reckless and stupid. But with where we stand right now, keeping the belt on Page just doesn't seem like a good idea to me. If he just winds up beating Punk flat 1, 2, 3, I mean, okay, but where does that leave Punk afterwards? Just floundering around like Bryan Danielson was, and look where he's at now. So I'm particularly interested to see what they go with for a finish for that match at the pay-per-view. Again, I know Tony's an advocate of Hangman Page, but the reality's got to set in eventually that he's just not the guy. Definitely not right now, and that's clear as day. So, overall, my excitement level for this pay-per-view is pretty much centered around two things. Wardlow versus MJF, and whatever they decide to do with Hangman Page and CM Punk in the finish. It's certainly not something I'm expecting to be a blowaway in terms of an all-around pay-per-view, but there's still enough there to keep me interested and earn my $49.99 to order and watch it. Bearing in mind, I'm going with the old school mechanism on this one because I don't have a subscription to Fight TV. So I'm plunking out the big bucks for this one, AEW. You better not disappoint. All right, then. We are officially an hour into the show. I have completely killed my voice. And we've got to talk about the retro stuff. So let's jump on in and do that. NWA World Championship Wrestling. This would be May 24th, 1986. And the show begins with footage of a house show cage match featuring the following names. And I am not making this up in the slightest. Dusty Rhodes, the Road Warriors, the Russians, and Baron von Raschke. Yes, they put Baron von Raschke in a steel cage with 5 other dudes in the year 1986. That sounds ghastly. But this was no ordinary house show match. This was the match where the Russians finally lost the 6-man tag team championship. After carrying the trophy around for months and months and never having defended the thing, they finally dropped it to Dusty and the Road Warriors. And in fact, it hit me soon after seeing Baron involved with this thing. Oh yeah, that's right. Baron was actually kind of brought into the NWA in '86 to team with the Russians because of the Crusher Khrushchev injury. And then for reasons that were never really explained, he found himself teaming with Paul Jones to feud with Jimmy Valiant and not doing much of anything involving Ivan and/or Nikita. Hey, plans change, I guess. And we cut to the booth for an opening Ric Flair promo. And of course, my first lines here before he even starts saying a word. Why the fuck is Ric Flair bleeding? And I'm not joking, he literally had a split lip for absolutely no reason. Chapstick, Rick. It's called chapstick. And I'm just laughing the entire time he's trying to do this promo because while he's there blowing a gasket and doing the usual red-hot Ric Flair verbiage, he's also cognizant of the fact that his lip is split wide open, so he's trying to lick his bottom lip to cover up the blood, and it's just bad times all around. But among his topics of discussion, there was something here involving a $1,500 suit that he purchased in Kansas, and the fact that he's still number one because he's the world champion. By the way, Flair's lip did not stop bleeding at any point in this segment. In fact, the more he talked, the worse it got, which made it 10 times better. Afterwards, we cut to the ring for our first match. It is George South versus Steve Regal. And no, for the record, that is not Lord Steven Regal of WCW fame. That is Steve Regal of, several different territorial runs, in fact. His most notable run probably being with the AWA as a team with gorgeous Jim Garvin, where they were former tag champions. It's a good little TV match. George South was a good worker, so he was a good guy to put in there to feed for Regal in his debut. And while they're doing this match, J.J. Dillon came out for a scouting session. And while he's at the interview booth putting over Regal and kind of making it seem like he was interested in managing Regal in some capacity, I was then hit with the logic gaffe from the end of the previous year where I thought the story of JJ managing Tully and the Horsemen was so he could explicitly work for them and not manage anybody else. Remember, wasn't there some kind of promo he did at the end of 85 where he mentioned he was dropping his contractual deals with everyone else because he wanted to focus solely on the Horsemen? Most of that stemming from the whole Buddy Landell debacle where he left unexpectedly and kind of left JJ to piss in the wind for a period of time. Talk about plans changing, right? So, the whole JJ deal here didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me, but good match beyond that. Following that, we had Magnum TA out for a promo, and after weeks and weeks and months of Nikita Kolav holding off on getting into the ring to fight Magnum for the U.S. title, Magnum has finally constructed a theory. He has found the single reason to explain why the match hasn't happened yet. To which I expected him to say, long-term storytelling, brother, but that wasn't quite it. No, apparently Magnum's theory is that Nikita has indulged in the good life of the American routine for so long now, he's become complacent. He's lost that Soviet edge, if you will. Those long, hard days of training in the dungeons and putting his body through rough periods. Now Nikita's soft. That's right, S-A-W-F-T, soft. And as we found out later, as per accusations from David Crockett, Nikita has also become fat.
He's fat!
And then coming back from the break, we had a Russians promo, which went from every generic Ivan and Nikita promo we've heard 100,000 times to probably the greatest Ivan and Nikita promo segment we've ever seen on the Superstation, due in large part to David Crockett being David Crockett. Starts with Ivan doing his little spiel about them losing the six-man tag title and they're entitled to a rematch, blah, blah. But y'all want to talk about why I love David Crockett so much. I don't know what sparked this little bit of dialogue here, but David had balls of steel for what he did next. He begins ripping into the Russians, saying that Magnum's theory about them is absolutely correct. And while running down the fact that Nikita has lost his edge, he infers that he's, and I quote, overweight. And that alone was hilarious, but if you also capture the visual of Tony's reaction to that statement on camera, 5 stars. Tony reacted as if to say, well, this man is about to die in front of my eyes. And while I totally expected Nikita to just rip David to shreds right then and there, no. Instead, he just stood there and took it. I mean, the David thing was so out of left field here, I can't even begin to explain to you how amazing it was watching it on screen. But again, we're always talking about the kind of color commentator David was on these NWA studio shows. He was as pro-babyface as pro-babyface announcers go. And when it came to talking smack on the heels, he was going to make it known to the public that he despised and loathed them all. And him having the intestinal fortitude to outright call Nikita Kolav fat on live television, balls. That's all I can say. Balls. We had gorgeous Jimmy Garvin versus Lee Peak. I wrote down one thing about the match. Brainbuster 1, 2, 3. Literally all there is to say about it. And then he did a post-match promo where he began to draw analogies between Wahoo and roaches, and how when you think you've killed the roach, it still manages to crawl back and find its way to you. He also says that if Wahoo gets in his way, he's going to bend him over his knee and beat his butt with a strap. Foreshadowing. Tony also had a very unsettling cap to this where he said, "Probably not the best to talk about straps when you talk about Wahoo McDaniel." Now, of course, he was referencing the Indian strap match gimmick, but if he took that out of context, sounds fairly suspect. And then we went directly to Nikita Kolav versus Bob Owens, and for whatever reason, they decided to let Bob Owens actually try and get in offense on the Russian Nightmare in this match. Perhaps Bob Owens was not the best job guy to do this with, considering the fact that, well, he sucked. Obviously, they're trying to run with the story that Nikita is not in the right headspace in his matches because he's fat and out of shape, even though he looks no different physically than he did 6 or 7 months ago. And of course, Nikita killed the guy with a sickle and won in the end. Although I will note this is coming from someone who always thoroughly enjoyed Nikita's work. It's no secret that the guy was still very green by this point in his career. He was only in the business for 2 years by this point, I think. Having him do the kayfabe ring rust story when he was still very ring rusty as a shoot, maybe not the best angle to run with. That's all I'm saying. We had Wahoo McDaniel versus Butch Cooper. We also had a Great American Bash report beforehand where Tony and David just let everyone know that tickets are available now and that they shouldn't be making summer vacation plans in the case that the NWA would be coming to their hometown for the tour. It's a lot more captivating plug than whatever in the hell this match was. Holy shit, this was bad. Keep in mind, Wahoo is not a spring chicken at this stage in the game. I believe this was the first Butch Cooper match I've ever seen on the Superstation shows. Whew. 2 ships passing in the night here, bro. That's what this was. I particularly like the beginning part where they're just flopping around on the mat in sloppy-looking amateur wrestling spots, and after neither guy was able to get leverage over the other, they just kind of stood back up, kept doing stuff. Wahoo also hit a backbreaker over his knee at one point where he looked like he was legitimately on the brink of passing out. He was so exhausted. Keep in mind, they had been wrestling for maybe 2 minutes at most by that point. And then finally, Wahoo just said, "Fuck this," and he hit a flying chop off the ropes, followed it with a double underhook suplex for the 3. Appalling. And we had JJ and Tully back out for a promo. Saw a lot of JJ on this particular show for some reason. He's in 3 different segments in this one episode. Anyway, they were basically there to revisit the Ron Garvin tape fist story and recap their deal from last week where Garvin said he was willing to let Tully tape his fist so that they could have a one-on-one match. Of course, Tully rebuts the whole thing by saying that his belt reads National Heavyweight Wrestling Champion for a reason, and he does not need to tape his fist to throw a good punch to his opponent. It was a fine enough promo, but just kind of there. Then we had the Rock and Roll Express taking on the Mulkey Brothers. And this week the Mulkeys had on matching purple tights. So to anyone that is terrible at telling guys apart when they look the same and have matching gear, good luck with this one. This was 1,000 times better than the Gibson-Morton tag from last week, where they somehow managed to screw up their finishing double dropkick. And I guess they figured for this week, better safe than sorry. So instead of going with the double dropkick attempt here, Ricky Morton hit one of the Mulkeys with a dropkick of his own and then pinned him with a backslide. Nice. Shaska Watley wrestled Doug Dellinger. I expected absolute sheer catastrophe here. It was passably bearable. The wrestling was completely substandard, but anytime Shaska Whatley is out there being a complete cartoon character, it's usually entertaining. It's particularly great listening to him admonish the crowd and shout out obscenities to them. I believe I heard him legitimately scream out, "Shut up, you big hoe," to someone at one point, which was just fucking grand. Whatley won with the superplex after exposing a little too much of Dellinger's farmer's tan under the tights, if you know what I'm saying. Didn't need to see that. And on the subject of shouting off-the-cup vulgarities, the Road Warriors did a promo after this match, sporting their newly won six-man tag trophy. And while they're out there putting that over, out walks Baby Doll to inform everyone that the victory party that the Warriors threw for Dusty and Baby Doll in Baltimore was the best party she's ever been to, while admitting that she's been to a lot of parties in her time. I'll bet. And after planting a wet one on both Hawk and Animal's cheek, she says that June is Kiss a Road Warriors month for all the ladies. So I guess Jimmy Garvin was right all along. Baby Doll really is loose. Out here kissing and getting with different men every week on this show. Don't you always hate it when the heels are proven right in storyline? And before they wrap things up here, Hawk had another handful of pot-shot one-liners directed at Flair, where he says that the only reason Flair gets all the girls is due to the shortage of men in the towns he visits, and the other reason he gets girls is because his boyfriend Brucey kicked him out of the commune. Harsh. We had Jim Cornette out to do a promo on, speak of the devil, Baby Doll. God, she's become the center of attention on these shows in recent weeks, hasn't she? He's out there doing the women don't belong in wrestling shtick. Says it'll be a rainy day in hell before a woman ever beats a man in a legitimate professional wrestling match, which, oh, never mind, I'll just leave that one go. He also says that his mama sent him a check for $50,000 to cash out on having the Midnight Express beat down the James Gang in order to rip off their masks and reveal them as Magnum and Dusty. Not really sure why Corny needs to put out a $50,000 bounty to have his own men take out Magnum and Dusty when I'm sure they'd be more than happy to do it for free, but hey, big payday for Dennis and Bobby, I guess. I'm sure they took kindly to that little bit of extra pocketed income. And then the Midnights wrestled Mike Samani and Tony Zane. Of course, Bobby and Dennis are their usual great selves in the ring, but my attention is mostly averted to what's going on with Corny's interaction with David and Tony. Best part of this segment was the line where Cornette starts hounding Tony Schiavone for not having muscles after apparently hearing he spends time lifting dumbbells every week. And normally the guys do a good job restraining their laughter on the show when the heels say something funny. This time, Corny legitimately popped David. As soon as he heard that insult to Tony, David didn't even try holding back. God, I love this show. Then the Road Warriors killed Paul Garner and Larry Clark, and I think Tony summed this one up pretty well. Time to hurt somebody. Word. Probably could have put that on a t-shirt and it would have sold millions. My favorite part in this match is the moment after Garner sees Clark getting tossed around and mutilated for like 2 straight minutes. He gives his partner the hesitant tag to get into the ring, and upon crossing through the ropes, he pops a glance at Animal, and when I tell you that this man facially sold that his life was about to end, it might have been the greatest sell in the history of the business. Garner knew his fate. He knew he was about to die, but hey, man, got to take one for the team, you know? We did have a baffling line from Schiavone at the end of this match where after Hawk hoists up Clark into a Canadian backbreaker position, Tony says, and I quote, "This is an effective counter to the figure 4 leg lock." To which I said, in what fucking parallel universe is the Canadian backbreaker a proper reversal to the figure 4 leg lock? One involves cranking a guy's leg on the mat, while the other involves holding a guy up over your head in the air, working over his back. I failed to see the connection. All these years later, and Tony Schiavone still doesn't know a wrist lock from a wristwatch. Then we had a Magnum, Dusty, and Baby Doll promo, and God was Dusty great here. Of course, Magnum and Baby Doll are on camera first, and Magnum's trying to do a promo about God knows what. Meanwhile, I can't hear a thing because off camera, Dusty is meandering around ringside and high-fiving fans and making it impossible for anything to be captured on the audio with Magnum's promo. And as Dusty comes back to the booth, he begins talking about the 37 million homes that the 605 Saturday Night Show airs on TBS nationwide. And when you factor in 3 people per household, that comes out to 2,800 million people watching around the country. So clearly Dusty went to the school of Steiner math. We also had a line here from Dusty where he explains that when you hang a person upside down naked, they're like a woman because they all look the same. And the only person I'm watching for the remainder of the promo is Baby Doll, who, God bless her, she was doing her damnedest to restrain herself from bursting out laughing after that line. She utterly failed, and frankly, I don't blame her. And the whole premise of the promo, from what I gathered, was after having just won the 6-man tag titles along with the Road Warriors, Dusty is already over it, and he's ready to challenge Ric Flair for the World's Heavyweight title. Dusty's gonna Dusty. What can he do? Then we had Ron Garvin versus Thunderfoot, which was not quite on the same level as the Dusty promo in terms of entertainment. Also, yeah, Thunderfoot still exists, sporting the neon green bodysuit for this one. I believe this is also JJ's 3rd segment on this one show. And here he was out there in the split screen cutting a heat promo on Garvin. And they did some stuff for a while. The match went significantly longer than I was expecting it to go. And the only thing I wrote down was the finish, where of all finishers to go with, they had Ronnie win with a jackknife cover. Howled with laughter at this finish. The Fist of Stone is not fully healed, so of all moves to pull out of the back pocket, God damn it, we're going with the old-fashioned flash roll-up. Great stuff. And then Ric Flair and Arn Anderson wrestled the Italian Stallion and Rocky Kernodle. And once you get past the visual absurdity of watching Ric Flair extensively feed for Rocky fucking Kernodle, of all people, it was a very fun little tag match. Yeah, I think it's something I've talked about briefly before, the whole idea of should Flair have been selling and feeding for a lot of these job guys on these studio shows like he did? In hindsight, probably not. It's common to what I complain a lot about in wrestling today, where, you know, a lot of the top card guys do way too much 50-50 exchanging with the lower card guys, and it ends up kind of hurting the top shelf guys because it puts them on too much of a level playing field. And I still stand by that to a degree. I just talked about it last week when I watched AEW's World Champion have a highly competitive back and forth match with a lower undercard guy from a minor league Japanese promotion, and the guys getting in multiple visual pins and near falls on their alleged top guy of the company, and I don't know, it just looked ridiculous. The story never called for it. The guys never had any prior outings or matches before it. It ended up just weighing your top guy down, because in the ideal world where we're trying to buy this as a legitimate sport where there are tiers of skills and ability with your given talent, your number one guy should not be struggling that much to beat a lower card guy. And it's the same thing going here with seeing Ric Flair getting pummeled around by a guy like Rocky Kernodle, who we've already established he's a job guy on this show. You want to have him hit a couple arm drags on Flair, that's fine, but Flair doing the whole bumping montage and taking several moves in a row from the guy and having to duck out of the ring to catch his breath, sorry, not buying that shit. Aside from that, Arn and Flair are great together as a team. And probably another rare instance of actually seeing Flair win with the figure four. He got the Stallion to submit here as well. If only poor Stallion knew how to elevate Flair up over his shoulder into a Canadian backbreaker from that seated position. May have been able to reverse it. Right, Tony? And immediately after the match, Flair and Arn called out the Rock and Roll Express from the ring apron. So fast forward about 15 seconds. Morton and Gibson are right there to take the fight to the heels. And as Tony tries to pitch to commercial, David Crockett, biggest mark to ever call a professional wrestling sport in the history of the business, goes, "No, we can't cut away now." And we come back from the break. We are greeted with Robert Gibson being attended to by all the baby faces in the ring because apparently the Horseman did a little Pillmanizing heat angle to poor Gibson's leg. And while the announcers are recapping what went down or trying to see if they can pitch to the truck to get a replay of the incident so that we can see what happened during the break, well, I guess the production crew didn't have the tape after all. This also left David Crockett flabbergasted. "What do you mean we don't have a tape to show?" God, I fucking love David. Can't say it enough, man. That guy's my spirit animal in every meaning of the word. But that did lead to Ron Rossi versus the Barbarian. Probably would have preferred to just have seen the footage of Gibson getting his leg attacked. Now, he did have Whatley and the Baron on commentary to call the action, and it was mildly more entertaining than the actual match. Whatley had a statement in here about Valiant where he said something to the extent of, "I knew you when you were wearing biscuits for shoes." Oh, what now? Barbarian won with a flying headbutt. Then we had a Steve Regal promo. And I did laugh at the opening part of this promo where Regal's trying to run down all the faces in the NWA. And of course, it's his first time doing promos on the Superstation here. So I guess he didn't get the memo of the camera cuts they typically do during these promos. So Regal begins cutting his promo at the zoomed out camera. And then when they cut to the second shot, he's still talking into the first camera. And I think someone either signaled for him to look at the other cam or maybe Tony kind of nudged him. But it was funny because he realized he was looking in the wrong spot and then he was kind of like, "Oh, fuck." It also took me a minute to realize it, but his promo began with saying that he's happy to be a part of Jim Crockett Promotions and he thanks Tony for a warm welcome. And then he pretty much immediately segues into a heel promo where he's talking smack on all the good guys. So either he forgot he was supposed to be a bad guy or he's one of those assholes that doesn't buy into the concept of faces and heels in the business. My memory of Regal's work is pretty scanty because I was not an avid watcher of the AWA tapes from back in the day. So I don't have much of an opinion on him one way or the other right now. I have absolutely no memory of anything he ever did in Jim Crockett Promotions in '86, so I guess this will be a fresh learning experience for me. And then Baron Von Raschke wrestled Rocky King. It was tragically dull. There was a spot toward the end of this match where Rocky went to whip Baron off the ropes. And I guess they just didn't come up with a game plan for what they were going to do. So Baron just kind of gently shoved Rocky over, and Rocky took a flat back bump like he just got shot out of a cannon. It looked like something you'd see children doing on a playground where someone just runs over and pushes a kid onto his ass. Would it hurt? Maybe, if the kid landed wrong, but for Rocky to take a flat back bump for it, a little overdramatic. And the finish saw Paul Jones toss in a black leather glove for Baron so he could use the claw hold. And then in order to conceal the black glove, he proceeded to stick his hand into his crotch area to make it look like he was playing with himself. Epic. That was followed with a Ric Flair Arn Anderson promo. And they were still kind of drenched in sweat here, so I guess this is taped right after their tag match earlier. And they're mostly there to run down what they did to the Rock and Roll Express. And somewhere in here, Flair starts ranting about Dusty and the Road Warriors again, referring to Hawk specifically as Chicago gutter trash. I also believe he implied at one point in this promo, when you sleep with the Horsemen, you're going to wake up sore in the morning. I'm not sure how to comment on that one, if I'm being honest. Is that a gangbang joke that went totally over my head, or is that just Ric Flair being wacky? Then we had another corny promo, and gotta be honest, love Corny. His promos are usually great, but I was already kind of getting a little itchy by this point in the show, and I didn't really hear him say anything important here, so I didn't write anything down. But at least we went out on a high note. Jimmy Valiant squashed Gene Ligon in 20 seconds using every cheating tactic in the book, and it was glorious. And this post-match promo, let me tell you about this post-match promo. Talk about someone giving Dusty a run for his money with promo of the night. Saying that he needs 2 big old eyeballs in the back of his head, 4 arms and 4 legs, because he's going to need whatever it takes to fight off Paul Jones's army. You got Pistol Pez with the scissors. You got Baron Von Raschko. Still fucking his name up, by the way. You got Barbarian with the hardest head. And there's a pause. And to clarify to the viewers at home what a head is, Valiant subtly says, the cranium. I popped. And of course we can't forget about Tijo Kijo. And Valiant promises that there will be a haircut. He's got the clippers with him at all times. He's got the Raging Bull by his side. And in the closing line to the show, best line of all time, Valiant addresses Jones, says that he doesn't hate him. But if he were stranded in the desert with no water, Valiant wouldn't spit in his mouth to save his life. And then he walked away. Don't ever change, Boogie Woogie Man. Oh, mercy. My Jimmy Valiant impersonation is not up to snuff, but believe me, this is a 5-star promo. All in all, I did enjoy the show. Promos were outstanding, and between Dusty and Jimmy Valiant, the show gets an automatic thumbs up. And there were some good matches on this one, too. I do have to double-check this on Peacock. I remember they used to have the July 5th event in Charlotte archived on the original WWE network. You know, once they switched to Peacock, I have no idea what they've updated in the library since. So I'll have to do a little research and see if there's any way I can get access to that show. If not, you know, maybe find a couple of the key matches to review on that show as part of the Retro Review series, but I'll figure out what I want to do with that in the next couple weeks. It'll be a shame if I can't find that show again, though, because I remember it was on the original WWE network, but we'll leave it to Peacock streaming to fuck everything up. What a terrible service. It's only $9.99 a month, though, so I guess I can't complain all that much. So anyway, let's talk about World Class Championship Wrestling. May 28th, 1983. And we had Bill Mercer back for this week, who did a phenomenally great job in the opening montage here with running down the 6-man tag in the main event, which included another one of those inset graphics of showing all the participants. And when we get to the portion where he's talking about David Von Erich, the graphic they chose to use for this angle, or they chose to use for this specific thing here, was the angle from a few weeks back where he was spanking Sunshine in the ring. And Mercer is casually explaining that David is taking on the role of disciplinarian. Nothing out of the ordinary here, folks. Just a man beating another woman on live television. Good Christian Samaritan right there. Yeah, there was a whole lot more to that main event than just the tag match, but we'll get to that shortly. Oh yeah, and Mercer also had a full-grown mustache for this episode. Must have had a lot of testosterone. To be able to grow a full mustache in the course of 2 weeks like that? Yeah, to be fair, it was better than the chin strap he was sporting for a while there. The first match was Chris Adams versus Johnny Mantell, and they had what I think Mercer classified later on the night as a good scientific wrestling match. It's probably the most fitting way to sum it up. It ended up going to a 10-minute draw, so they were spending a while in the early goings there, just working each other over on the mat and holds. I will be fair. There was a point where Adams had Mantell in a cross armbar, and I did one of those things where I was watching what was going on my monitor, but my brain totally spaced out for a minute, and I completely forgot where I was in that moment. It turns out when I zoned back in, Adams still had the armbar applied, so I take it I didn't miss anything important. Mantell did a strange-looking hold in this match where it kind of looked like he was going for the bow and arrow on Adams, but instead of locking his ankles and then bending his back across both of his knees, Mantell was kind of laying on one side while Adams was hung over one of his knees. It was innovative, but I think if you ask an MMA specialist, they'd look at that and go, yeah, that ain't real. Things picked up a little bit there in the last couple minutes when they were doing more reversals and false finishes, but you could tell they were both kind of winded by the end. As I said before, though, Chris Adams is someone that I didn't get a whole lot of exposure to at a young age, but the more I'm going back and watching him work here in World Class around this time, I maintain he's someone that would really fit into the modern era of wrestling today. You throw that guy in there with a Bryan Danielson or even someone like a Kyle O'Reilly, like they would totally mesh together perfectly. Overall, fun little opener. And then following that, they aired the replay of the Ric Flair Kevin Von Erich World Heavyweight title match, which if you want to hear me talk about that in detail, I believe you can go back and check out my earlier April recaps of World Class from last month. Can't believe it's already been a month since we talked about that match. I'm not going to spend time going over it again because that's just redundant, but I will note here, and again, this is something that you would constantly see in the territories back in the day, and it's a real shame that modern wrestling can't ever take the time to actually do stuff like this anymore. Instead of chugging out new content left, right, and center, just taking a segment of your television program every week to revisit previous matches in detail, to remind the fans of the big matches that they may have seen at one point. Whether it's a pay-per-view or a TV match, it doesn't matter. To be honest with you, I kind of like it if this is what AEW Rampage would be. I'd love it if AEW just did this every Friday and, they just dish out a 15-minute segment of their show or even multiple segments on their show to re-examine and highlight big angles and packages. Because with the amount of content AEW tries to throw out in a given week, that's the kind of show that needs a goddamn recap segment or some kind of opening montage to just talk about the shit we saw from the previous few weeks, instead of just presuming that we're all going to remember anything that happens the minute it's over. Believe me, I've been watching this stuff for well over 20 years now, and if I'm struggling to remember what takes place on your wrestling show in a given week, yeah, maybe a recap segment wouldn't hurt. So then we had a cool little deal here. Kind of an impromptu match, but they gimmicked this up as the captain's match. So Iceman got on the mic before the scheduled six-man, says he wants to get a little bit of redemption on Buddy Roberts for cutting off the Iceman's dreadlock from last week. So he proposed a captain's match, where if the fans voted for the Iceman and Buddy Roberts to captain their team for the six-man, they would have a match right now, and Iceman essentially promised that he would cut off a piece of Buddy's hair for the people. And they didn't shy away from that opportunity. So, of course, the fans vote unanimously for the Iceman and Roberts to captain their team, which led to them in their singles match first. And they went about 5 minutes. Buddy got like 30 seconds of heat on the Iceman at the beginning, if that. And then Parsons whipped Buddy off the ropes, hit him with, as what Mercer is continually referring to now as the butt. It doesn't get any less cringe anytime I have to say it aloud, but there you go. And immediately after the bell, Parsons goes over to his corner to pull out the giant scissors from under his towel gimmick, and he proceeds to restrain Buddy on the ring mat while he chops off a bit of his back hair. And of course, Bill Mercer and myself continue to play the role of human resources here, where we are showing extraordinary concern over the fact that there are large men going after each other with sharp projectiles. It's especially scary when they're dropping the scissors on the ground after taking punches to the face. But it was a fun little angle they did here. You know, anytime the fans get to see the Freebirds get humiliated, it's a win for them. I guess the only thing I was wondering is, why didn't they just save the haircut angle until after the six-man? You know, because instead of it being a big angle to close out the show where the heels get humiliated and the fans have a good laugh out of it, you know, they have the Iceman cut off a chunk of Buddy's hair, and then they just come back after the break for the regular six-man tag. The six-man tag was good. Again, it's the Freebirds versus Kevin and David Von Erich and the Iceman. It's the usual hot spot show kind of main event that totally works for the Dallas region. Just kind of a wild brawl from start to finish. But the action is constant throughout, but unlike most brawl matches today where it just winds up guys doing completely incoherent clusterfucks where everyone's just doing random stuff and nothing makes sense, you know, at least these guys still bother to adhere to regular tag rules. Good stuff with Kevin running wild early on. Freebirds got to work over David for the heat. They did a fantastic false tag to Kevin that just absolutely wrecked the fans. Terry's got David in a clutch, and David's reaching out to his corner, and Kevin's leaning out over the top rope, trying with all his might and strength to extend his arm to David. And then right when David finally manages to get the tag, of course, Hayes is running in from behind, and David Manning misses the tag entirely. Parsons ended up getting the hot tag at the end. Things kind of broke down with all six guys. The finish was kind of fucked up. Not really sure what they were going for entirely, but Buddy gets knocked out to the floor. Gordy went for a backdrop onto Parsons. Just totally screwed it up. Just dropping Parsons flat on his stomach because he couldn't get him overhead. And then Gordy ran toward the apron where Buddy was so that he could punch Parsons in the face. And yeah, it just didn't look all that good. That said, it was a fun little main event. Interesting little story to have David be the one to take the extended heat, but you know, the Von Erichs were all so gifted, you can make any one of them the babyface in peril. It would be totally believable. Aside from the big hair angle with the Iceman and Buddy, you know, the show didn't have a whole lot of noteworthy fallout. Great main event six-man, and the opener with Chris Adams was a solid little 10-minute Broadway. And like I mentioned earlier, you know, I'm a sucker for any time a wrestling company actually bothers to take the time to recap and highlight previous matches from shows. You know, used to watch it all the time in Mid-South where Bill Watts would be sitting there with either Boyd Pierce or Jim Ross, and you know, they'd be talking about previous angles from weeks back, showing highlights, explaining why what we saw was important and what the ramifications were for it. Of course, same thing can be said when we're talking about World Championship Wrestling too. You know, David Crockett and Tony Schiavone recapping footage and taking the time to properly explain things. But, of course, I don't know what I'm talking about, right? Just your average run-of-the-mill wrestling fan that's been watching this shit for years and knows how to decipher good wrestling shows from the rest of the pack. Anyway, thanks for stopping in for this stellar edition of the FSWR Friday edition. Monday, of course, going to be a bigger show. Got the recap of the AEW pay-per-view to talk about. We'll see how far my predictions are off. But as it stands now, I plan on going over a few brief notes for Rampage as long as it doesn't pertain to anything that would be irrelevant by the time the pay-per-view's over. You know, it probably wouldn't be any longer than a 2 or 3 minute rundown, but hey, notes are notes, I guess, right? And of course, we also have NWA Power, which we'll be talking about as well. So, kind of a packed show for Monday, but that's good. I always like to have another one of those extensions when we get the chance. So, enjoy the show if you plan on ordering it. If not, stop by on Monday and hear me complain about it. Take care, all. Peace.